I'll start and say, hi, I'm Chris. I've staffed Goat Peak for the last 3 summers. And I've probably run into some of you at the mountain. My cattle dog Hudson is also pretty well known up there. He's a good people greeter. Some people ask me how I got really involved in fire lookouts. I was living here in the valley many years ago, and the winter of 2013-14 was also a pretty low snowpack year. And I was looking for things to do besides skiing, and I started to go up and visit some of the fire lookouts, which are really notoriously hard to get to in the winter here in the valley. My dad is a big hiker, peak bagger, as he calls himself, loves to climb the high points, and he said, gosh, maybe you should visit all the ones in Okanagan County. How many are there? Maybe you should do all the ones in the state. And so that's basically, I thought, wow, that's kind of an interesting idea. And I started to research the history of these structures, and I just got really enamored with the stories. And so for 2 years between, I think it was 2017 and 19, I drove all across Washington State and visited all of our last remaining standing fire lookouts. This is kind of a funny picture. This is a fire lookout actually on the top of Mount Adams. Most people don't know it's there because it's under snow most of the year, but it is. And then in 2022-23, I worked with the retired District Ranger Mike Liu, who's also here tonight, and we formed the Methow Valley Forest Fire Lookout Association, primarily as a subchapter of a national organization to help preserve and work with our local ranger district on these structures. And this was a picture from painting Lookout Mountain that we did in the fall of 21. So I'll talk a little bit, just a very brief history of fire lookouts. This photo is actually a historic photo of a 1920s steel tower that used to be on Mount Leecher. I'm really glad the ladders aren't like that anymore. And the age of lookouts, fire lookouts were built in the early 1900s, mostly as a response to the Great Fire of 1910, also called the Big Burn. I think a lot of people in this room are probably familiar with that. Lookouts were staffed mostly into the 50s. Here locally, we had many staffed into the 70s and 80s. After the 1950s, many lookouts were abandoned, destroyed by nature, vandals, neglect. These photos are historic photographs of lookouts here in the valley. The upper left is old 40s cab on Mount Leecher. The upper right is Meeby Pass. It's not as well known of a lookout, but it is still there. The lower left is Monument 83 up on the Canadian border, and the lower right is one of the first lookouts on Slate Peak. So lookouts in Washington State now. Once upon a time, we had over 750 lookouts across the state. Today, just over 90-ish remain. I say ish because there is some debate in the lookout community about whether some of these structures actually qualify or there should be other structures on the list, but mostly there are about 90-ish still remaining standing in their original locations. That doesn't count some lookouts have been relocated. Buttermilk Butte is an example in Twisp that was relocated to private property. In Okanagan County, we're actually home to the highest number of still standing historic fire lookouts, which is 23. And it ranges from the Methow Valley Ranger District in the west all the way over into Eneas area, Mount Bonaparte, and then down Knowlton Knob down to the south. And then with the Methow Valley, we actually have 8 lookout sites here with 10 historic structures still remaining. The northernmost is Monument 83 on the border, and the southernmost being Mount Leecher, which is still staffed by Lightning Bill. So this is just a quick snapshot of the lookout structures that are still standing in the Methow Valley. Now, I said we have 10 structures that still remain, and this shows 9. There's kind of a mystery 10th one, and I've left it for last because it's kind of special. But I'm going to walk through each one of these lookouts just a little bit and show some photos, history, and trivia. This is a photo from fall at Goat Peak, which is really great if you've been up there to enjoy the larches. So the first lookout site I'll talk about is North 20 Mile. This site is north of Winthrop. It's up in the Honeymoon Creek area, if anyone's familiar with it. It's 7,400 feet, pretty high elevation, and there's actually two structures at this lookout site. The structure on the left is an old, what they call a D6 cupola, and the one on the right is an L4 tower. My cattle dog Hudson actually made a guest appearance in this photo. The really neat thing about this lookout site is that it celebrated a centennial last year. We really hope to celebrate this a little bit more, but it came up on us a little fast, so we're hoping maybe we do a 101 or a 102 celebration. This structure right here is the last intact cupola of its kind in Washington State. And it's only one of a few remaining in the entire Northwest. So it is a pretty rare structure, and as you can see, it's in really great shape thanks to the work of a lot of volunteers. So some interesting trivia about North 20. As I said, it's one of the last intact cupolas in the Northwest, the last in the state. It is the third highest fire lookout in the state. It's one of 3 lookout sites in the state with 2 structures. And there's a picture of a helitack crew that wrapped, that wrapped the lookout for fire protection during the 2021 Cub Creek 2 fire. A couple views from North 20 Mile. Personally, this is one of my favorite sites in the valley. It's a tricky one to get to. It's about 13 miles round trip, 4,500 gain. The trail's pretty rough, but the views are phenomenal all the way up into the central Pasayten. You can look into Remmel Cathedral area if anyone's familiar with that. And these were taken from the tower on a work party. You can see the cupola kind of down below. And then just a brief history of this site with some historic photos. It was started in the 20s with an old log cabin at the top. And the cupola was built in 23, staffed until about 47. There were several fires in the area in the late 20s that threatened the lookout station. It was one of the first stations to be staffed, often in fire seasons. And the L4 tower was built in 1947, staffed until 88. This is a picture of one of the lookouts carrying water up from a spring below the lookout in the late 70s. Isabel, yep. And a couple more historical photos. Thank you. I thought these were really great. These were from the Schaefer Museum for a presentation we did on the centennial. It's mules hauling 20-foot lumber to the summit in 1923 using swivels to negotiate the switchbacks on the trail. And this is an old panorama taken in 1930 looking north from the site. These panoramas were taken from almost all the lookout sites in usually the 1930s, some in the 1940s. And a few more pictures of this cupola. Again, 100 years old last year, which is pretty neat, and a couple pictures of the interior. And I just want to take a minute to also acknowledge in 2015, the late Bob Pfeiffer, who was a retired fish and wildlife biologist, Forest Fire Lookout Association member, did donate a lot of his time, effort, and money to restore this cupola. And there were other volunteers involved, including Mike Liu, who's in the room. Our local smoke jumper base did a drop of materials up there, and thanks to his efforts, the cupola is still intact today. And a few more photos of the tower from North 20, again staffed until about 1988. So the next site is Monument 83, which is up on the Canadian border. This site is actually pretty difficult to get to from the United States side. Most people go in from the Canadian side. This is also a site that has 2 structures, a little log cabin cupola and a tower. Interestingly enough, it is the northernmost lookout in the United States. The log cabin cupola, however, is Canadian. It is not under the jurisdiction of the Mountain Valley Ranger District. It was constructed in 1930 and then determined to be on Canadian soil. So in, it was like 1950s, the US built the tower so that we had a lookout site there. There's some neat trivia on this site, and I have a photo up there. In 1961, there was a gravestone for Pasayten Pete, and it was believed that it was a beloved pack mule. You can also see the 20-foot wide US-Canada border slash from the summit, which is really neat. It's that lower left photo. And then in 2022, the park spire did burn over the area, but the lookouts were wrapped and they survived. And views from Monument 83, really spectacular site. You can see all the way up into Canada, a lot of the Pasayten wilderness, very remote. And a few historical photos of this site. It actually started in the 1920s as a camp with a tree platform, which is the lower middle photo. Many lookout sites did start that way as just a simple platform and a tree. And the log cabin cupola built in the 1930s. There was a newspaper article in '37 saying the lookout from Okanagan was the only United States Forest Service lookout posted on foreign soil. In 52-53, the L4 tower was built, staffed into the 70s, and telephone comms were established with Mazama and 2 other U.S. lookout stations in 1954. And another historic panorama in 1934 taken from the site. You can see the little treetop lookout there. A few photos of the cabin. Again, this isn't technically one of our 10th lookouts, but because the cabin's at the site, it's a really neat structure. And a few more photos of the tower. And next is Meeby Pass. So this is probably a lesser known lookout site in the valley. This is actually up Highway 20, and it's in the East Creek, Granite Creek area. This is called an L5 ground house. This is a really awesome structure because it's the last known of its kind. There are no others like this that are still in existence. It's a tiny 10 by 10 structure that was the smallest fire lookout ever built by the Forest Service. The structure was prefabricated and typically hauled to the summit by horses and mules. And this one also underwent some restoration thanks to Barry George, Doug McKeever, Jerry Huddle, a few FFLA lookout members in 2002. You can see the condition of the structure in the lower photo. Aerial photographer John Skurlock also formed a group to help work on this structure. And again, without those restoration efforts, it certainly would be in pretty rough shape today. The views from Meeby Pass, this one is also difficult to get to because the bridge is out on Granite Creek and it hasn't been logged out for a while. So it's a little bit of an adventure. But I have a little bit of information about work that's going to happen up there a little later in this presentation. And a brief history on this site. In 1933, Wenatchee Daily World reported that there was a twin L5 style lookout like this that was constructed on Setting Sun Mountain. That's a little bit north of Goat Peak. And the lookout builder then came to Meeby and built Meeby Pass. So thanks to work again in 2002 and 2013, the lookout still survives. This so far is the only historic photo found of the lookout. There might be more out there, but it's the only one that people know about so far from 1935. And a panorama from 1936. It's neat. You can see the pack team actually in the panorama. And then next up is Lookout Mountain. So I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with Lookout. It's the one above Twisp. It's a 25-foot L4 tower built in 1937. A little trivia, when Lookout was in operation, it did average over a dozen first reports of fires, which makes it, I think it was the record-setting lookout in the Methow Valley for reporting fires. It was used by the Aircraft Warning Service during World War II to detect enemy aircraft. And it was repainted by volunteers in 2021. I had the great fortune of opening this lookout for 4th of July weekend 2 seasons ago to host visitors, and really hope that we can do it again. Views from Lookout Mountain. It's possible to get up there in the winter, and it's a really great hike in the spring, you know, kind of early summer when all the balsam root's in bloom. And then a brief history of Lookout. So it was established as a camp in 1911, which is the upper left photo. In 1922, they built a log cabin and the cost was $165. I wish real estate costs were like that now. In 1937, they built the existing 25-foot L4 tower. The Mohawk Valley News reported that the lookout at the station staffed for 20 years and no other lookout reported a fire ahead of him that was within his range of vision, so he was quite well known. And Lookout was staffed regularly until about 1997. And a 1930s panorama from Lookout Mountain. This is looking north up the Mohawk Valley. And the next site we have is First Butte. So First Butte is Boulder Creek area, just a little bit north of Winthrop. And it's an L4 tower built in 1938. My photo here is a little outdated. It has since been painted since then. And some trivia on the First Butte site. This was staffed in 1942 by the World War II Aircraft Warning Service as well. The ground house, which is shown in the lower left, it was converted to sleeping quarters for enemy aircraft spotters. Volunteers from Filson and the National Forest Foundation were actually repainting this lookout when the Cub Creek 2 fire started. And unfortunately, the ground house and the outhouse were both lost in the Cub Creek 2 fire. The fire did burn over the summit, and it burned the lower step of the lookout, but luckily the lookout survived, so we're really lucky to still have this structure. And the views from First Butte, these are also slightly outdated because a lot of the forest around the lookout burned in the Cub Creek 2 fire, but it's still just a beautiful view from that lookout site. And for history, First Butte also started as a camp in the 1920s. You can see some of the lookout staffers in the upper left. This lower left photo, in 1931, they built an interesting cupola on a tower. And then there was a news story in 1932 about the lookout actually requiring a tourniquet and emergency evacuation after he cut his foot while constructing the railing. 1938, the existing L4 tower was built. It was also used as aircraft warning station in World War II and staffed until the late 90s. And a panorama from First Butte in 1930, looking north. And now we have Goat Peak, 7,000 feet. This is one of my favorites, obviously. Little 15-foot L4 tower. This was built in 1950. Some nice trivia about Goat Peak. It is the second highest elevation staffed fire lookout in the state. The only one higher is Mount Bonaparte over in Tonasket. It was staffed by Lightning Bill Austin for 20 years. And I should know a lot of people know Lightning Bill. The United States Forest Service PAC teams still supply Goat Peak, which is really fun. And the lookout has been wrapped numerous times for fire, most recently in 2021. And I couldn't help but put this slide in as a little bit of trivia, but there was a goat at Goat Peak last season. And this is the goat standing next to the memorial for the lookouts of Goat Peak. And the views from Goat Peak, it's pretty hard to beat it. It's a great spot looking out across the North Cascades up into the Pasayten Wilderness and just down valley into Mazama and beyond. And interesting history on Goat Peak, it started with a cupola cab in 1923, so this is a very similar structure to what exists today up on North 20 Mile. The Wenatchee Daily World in 1930 said that Goat Peak was actually quite high and very hard to get to. They had to blast out parts of the trail to get out there every year. In 1931, they constructed a telephone line to Sunrise Peak, which is about 5 miles away. And then the current tower that's still staffed now was built in 1950. And this is a picture of the fire wrap. So Goat was wrapped in 2017 for the Diamond Creek fire, and then it was wrapped again in 2021 for the Cedar Creek fire. And a panorama looking north into the Pasayten Wilderness from Goat Peak in 1930. And Mount Leecher. So a lot of people might know Leecher because Lightning Bill is still actively staffing Leecher Mountain. This is just south of Twisp. It's in between Twisp and Carlton. 41-foot L4 tower built in 1954. It's a tall one. The interesting thing about this summit is that there have been a lot of different lookouts, different lookout style buildings on this summit. It hosted a 1920s steel tower that was moved to the smoke jumper base, and it was used as a jump training loft. It isn't there anymore. There was a ground cab. The existing cab up at Slate Peak actually came from Leecher Mountain. And the tower that's at Leecher right now came from Chilliwass Butte. Lightning Bill was also evacuated by helicopter during the Carlton Complex fire from Leecher. And the views from Leecher, the sawtooths are beautiful from there. It's got a really neat view, and also east over into the reservation. And here's kind of a sampling of the structures that have been on Mount Leecher. It's had quite a few. It started with a crow's nest tree platform in 1918. And that is actually our mystery 10th still existing lookout in the Methow Valley, which I'll talk about shortly. It had a windmill steel tower on it, a ground house, and then the existing structure was built in 1954 from Chilliwass Butte. And also a 1930 panorama from Leecher. And we have one lookout left before I talk about the little crow's nest, Slate Peak up at 7440. This is also a 41-foot L4 tower. This is the second highest elevation lookout in Washington State. The only one higher is the remains of the lookout that are still on the top of Mount Adams. So the top 40 feet of Slate Peak, if you've ever noticed it, it kind of looks flat. It's because it was blasted off in World War II for a radar station that was never built. It was used in 1994 when Goat Peak was evacuated, and it was also used in 1996 for monitoring the Elbow Basin fire in the Pasayten. The views from Slate. So Slate is often in the marine layer because it's up on the crest. So there tends to be a lot of clouds over there, but it's a beautiful view. You can see Mount Baker all the way over into Whatcom County from up there. And the history of Slate, it started 24 as a gable roof cupola on the upper left. And then in 1932, there was a news article that the lookout, Ray Paul, got hit by lightning up there. It damaged the roof and set the bed on fire. He said he was able to put the fire out with a bucket of water. It was activated as an aircraft warning service station as well in World War II. And then the cab was moved from Leecher Mountain in 54. The top 40 feet of the summit was blasted off in 56, and then the existing tower was erected shortly after. And a panorama from Slate Peak. And then here is our mystery 10th lookout that still exists in the Methow Valley. And this is actually considered a unique fire lookout structure. It's the Mount Leecher Crow's Nest. And if you get lucky and you ever visit Leecher, Lightning Bill might tell you where it is. People are kind of protective of this one. It's built in 1918, and a lot of fire lookouts did start as these little tree platforms. It is likely one of the last ones in existence in Washington State. Funk Mountain over in Conconully, if anyone's familiar with that area, did have a crow's nest. It was presumed burned in the Muckamuck fire a couple of years ago, but that hasn't been completely confirmed yet. This little treetop is almost lost in the Carlton Complex fire, but it's still there. And this gives you an idea of what treetop lookouts look like in the early 1900s. They were often just little viewing platforms in tall trees like that. So the fact that we still have one of these left on Mount Leacher is pretty neat. So that was basically kind of our still existing Mahal Valley lookouts. It's, again, we have some of the last structures of their kind here, which is really just historically significant. The big question I get asked, are lookouts still relevant today? And I say yes, for many reasons. And I think our fire district would probably agree as well. So I'll talk a little bit about, the number of lookout staff today and how they are still relevant. So roughly a third of the 90-ish fire lookouts left in the state are still staffed. I think that's more than most people realize. Goat and Leacher do remain staffed here in the Mahal Valley. So here are some of the bonuses, I think, to having staffed fire lookouts. Obviously, early fire detection. These are some photos that I've taken from my last couple seasons at Goat Peak of just early smoke reports. There is, people argue there's technology now, there's infrared, we do have aircraft, and all that's very true, but I think all these things all work very well together. And there are still smokes that I've reported from Goat Peak before they ever showed up on any maps. These are a couple of examples. The photo on the top right, actually, it's pretty hard to see, so it just kind of gives you an idea how subtle it can be. But that was a very small smoke that was up in the Yellow Jacket area last year at the end of last season. The one on the lower right, there's actually two smokes in that photo. They're really hard to see. But they were in the wildlife area last year after we had a full day of lightning. And then the bottom right is a small smoke on Driveway Butte from 2021. And then here's a slide on fire behavior. I think from a lookout, even when I've been up at Goat Peak, I've taken it for granted sometimes what a great vantage point I have, just in terms of fire behavior. So when we have fire crews on the ground, I'm pretty easily able to see if we have any wind shifts. Like if the smoke column is shifting or changing in any way, if the fire is picking up in intensity, oftentimes I can see that from the lookout, sometimes before ground crews know. And these are a couple of pictures of just fire activity. The top photo is the Sourdough Mountain Fire last year, and I could often see it coming up before a lot of people on the ground. The lower left was the Crater Creek fire up in BC, actually, that put up quite a large plume last year. Both the lower pictures are that fire. And I think one of the huge reasons that lookouts are so important today is just communication. Goat Peak especially, with my location up on Highway 20 corridor, which is often a really difficult communication corridor. I do a lot of radio traffic. I've been surprised, actually, how much radio traffic I've done, especially last year. Lookouts are a really critical communication link, and I not only help communicate for fire crews, but also for our recreation crews. Last season, we had a lot of rec crews up in the Pasayten Wilderness who were doing trail work, and sometimes they have a really difficult time contacting our Wenatchee Dispatch Center. So from Goat Peak, I can hear almost everyone on the forest, fire crews, recreation crews, pretty far back in there. This is our smoke jump plane, and I took that photo. There was a smoke that was reported in the Fawn Peak area last year that was a false alarm, but it was our smoke jump plane flying over. So I also am often talking to aircraft, to just have an extra set of eyes on things. They're asking if I'm seeing anything, vice versa. The lower left photo was the Yellow Jacket smoke at the end of last year, and a jump ship coming in. So I'm communicating a lot of times with the fire crews to just guide them into an area where I have seen a smoke. And from there, they determine, if they want to put in ground crews or how they want to address it. And then weather, here's some good lightning photos. So another big bonus of having lookouts staffed is simply just eyes on weather. I can give fire and recreation crews a heads up when there's weather coming in. So a lot of the fires that we've had or smoke reports, we can have ground crews who are making their way into the fire while we still have very active weather. And that happened quite a bit last year, where both Bill and I were very busy trying to give our fire crews on the ground a heads up that, hey, there's lightning in your area or you're getting weather coming in. From a lookout, I can also verify ground strikes from lightning. I know there's a lot of lightning apps, and people love to use them. I use it too. And there have been a lot of times at Goat Peak where the lightning map looks like we just got slaughtered with 1,000 lightning strikes, and a lot of them were cloud to cloud, and I can verify that I didn't see anything. There's other times where I have seen lightning strikes that did not show up on the map. These were a couple of pretty big ones from last year. The top photo was actually taken when I was at Lookout Mountain, and that's Bill on Mount Leecher just about getting zapped. And I think he sent me a message and said, "Whoa, did you hear that?" And I said, "I think I saw it." And so now I'll take a few minutes to talk about the Methow Valley Forest Fire Lookout Association. So I really think that the history and the heritage and the stories from some of these fire lookouts are so important to preserve. And I formed this group to kind of help work with our ranger district to do just that. And this is a picture of volunteer work party up at North 20. We spent a lot of time up there in the last year or two. I do want to just give a shout out to Filson. They have been a really great supporter of doing fire lookout work, and they jump-started our chapter with a generous $1,000 donation. The Methow Valley Ranger District and North Zone archaeologists did secure us a $10,000 grant last year that we were able to use to purchase a whole lot of needed lookout supplies. So this went for paint, supplies for all the lookouts, cedar shake, shingles, all kinds of stuff. One of the first projects we did, actually, before we were officially the MVFFLA, it's kind of a long name, was repainting Lookout Mountain in 2021. I was actually staffing Goat Peak, and I came down early that season due to fire evacuations. And that fall, our ranger district gave us the okay to repaint this structure, but they were really busy with fires. So I partnered up with Mike Liu, and we decided, well, maybe we can crowdsource getting the materials to the summit. So we actually went and we bought 8 gallons of paint, 8 gallons of water, put a bunch of stuff down at the summit with a sign that said, "Hike me to the lookout." We were like, is this gonna work, or are we just gonna be hiking this stuff up all day? Amazingly, within about 2 or 3 hours that morning, all the stuff had made it to the summit. People had come out to hike it up. It was really great. And we were really excited. We kept having people come by asking, what else they could hike up. So it kind of gave us the idea, okay, there's people who really want to help with this, and we had a lot of volunteers who came out and, maybe spent a day or a couple hours painting Lookout Mountain, and it was just a really fun project. The photo in the upper right actually is Mike Liu carrying a ladder down from the summit on the trail, which was kind of fun. This was the neatest thing. Last year we had a paracargo drop at the North 20 Mile lookout site. So we were able to coordinate this with our North Cascades smoke jumper base. Getting materials to North 20 Mile is really tough because this is about a 13-mile round trip, 4,500 foot gain trail that's in it's a tough trail. And our jump ship came in. We were able to buy a lot of paint and supplies. They packaged it up, and we went up to the summit, and they were able to do a paracargo. It's amazing to see just how accurate they were. Like, they landed all the supplies right next to the lookout. When we were up there, we hadn't really thought through, like, oh, gosh, I hope this gets close, because if not, we're going to be hiking all of this stuff to the lookout. What we didn't count on was that we had to hike down all the paracargo gear after. I kind of got a little glimpse of what it might be like to be a smoke jumper coming out of a fire, and I was like, I don't think I want to carry that much weight ever again. And then for the North 20 Mile Centennial, we had a small but mighty group of volunteers who went up for a weekend last year, and we were able to repair some shutter damage on the cupola and also repaint it. It was a fun weekend because we actually had a lot of lightning storms in the area that weekend. And the lower left photo, you can kind of see we had like approaching, I mean, there was lightning coming, and we were wired into the lookout lightning system, trying to get the last bit of paint on it before the lightning hit. We were pretty successful, but there is one side that we just couldn't get that we're hoping we can get back to this year. But the lookout did get repainted. It makes a huge difference to have paint on these structures just so they can weather the elements. And then I'll talk about trail work. So we have partnered with the Met Trails Collaborative to help with some of the trail work. North 20 Mile especially is a really tough site. It was burned by the tripod fire and also the Cub Creek 2 fire. And with the lack of vegetation, the erosion, a lot of down trees come down every season. So there were volunteers every year trying to log out this trail. We did a lot of work last year just with tread work. It's a pretty rough area for it to hold up, but we are continuing to like partner with them on just some of the trail work up there. And then this next project was rebuilding the shutters for the small, tiny Meebe Pass lookout that's up on Highway 20. We had a carpenter, David Adams, who volunteered his time to rebuild these historic shutters, which he did from blueprints. The carpenters local 70 in Burlington donated $500 towards the purchase of the materials. And then members of the Methow Valley Ranger District helped to repaint the shutters. They're currently stored in a district warehouse, and we are hoping to fly these up to that lookout at some point and get them back on the lookout. And then it kind of brings us to future work plans. So again, I mentioned we have a partnership with the Methow Trails Collaborative. A big challenge with the Meebe Pass lookout, again, is access. Alan Jersick, who runs the Trails Collab, said that the Forest Service is investing heavily this coming year on getting a new steel bridge across Granite Creek, and also in clearing out that trail to make that site more accessible. And we're hoping with that we can get the shutters up and really finish the restoration of that structure that is the last standing of its kind. We'll also be doing work again up at North 20. The large tower up there has had a leaking roof for several years, and it needs to be addressed if we want to save the structure. So we do have a lot of the materials up there, and we'll be putting together a volunteer party to hopefully re-roof the tower and also get it repainted. There's also some work underway with Lookout Mountain. The lookout who used to staff Miners Ridge over in Darrington, actually, Russ Dalton, has stepped in to help us finish getting work done on Lookout Mountain. It's our hope that we can reopen that site as a volunteer interpretive site that'll be open to the public. It's a pretty popular lookout site, easy one to get to in Twisp. And then we need to do an inventory of Slate Peak. It likely needs quite a bit of work. Monument 83, we need to come up with a strategy for getting in there. It's a tough one on the border. There has been talk about a joint Canadian-US work party since the little cupola up there is on Canadian soil. And then we're always looking to start collecting stories and just, photos and oral histories for some of these lookouts. We want to start building that up because there's just so many fantastic stories out there. So then it brings me to how you can help. So we've been a really small but mighty little group. We're really hoping to, we're always looking for donations. We actually started a sticker campaign. We have really cool stickers. Unfortunately, I don't have any tonight because we got to get more printed, but we were doing a kind of donate what you can in exchange for stickers. I'm hoping to have a few pickup locations for those here in the Valley, or we can mail them out to you. We're also asking if anyone who really loves fire lookouts wants to come out and volunteer. We can always use help at work parties. Or you can help us with the organization. We could really use help with some of our financials, outreach, and just the history of these structures and recording it. We do have a website. It's called mvffla.org. And that's basically the end of my presentation with a nice, beautiful sunset shot from Goat. Yeah, so I'm glad that you guys could all come and hear a little bit about fire lookouts. And if anyone wants to get involved and really loves these structures, we would love to get any assistance we can. It's always so fun to have volunteer work parties and then meet other people who love these structures. It's been really fun. So, and then I guess we're entertaining questions, I suppose. All right.